Welcome to session number 9 of Introduction to Worldviews and Apologetics. Today we're going to be finishing up with the concept of worldviews and introducing the concept of apologetics. They're really two different things. And I'll explain what I mean by that as we get just a little further into today's lesson. I'm Dr. John McMath, retired from the Moody Bible Institute. I'm joined by my friends in Italy and in the Philippines and here in the US. This is always an exciting time to see virtually the whole world get together to study. So welcome to Wednesday evening, Wednesday morning, Thursday morning, whatever time it happens to be where you are right now. I'm going to start the share screen if I can manage it. And usually I can manage it. So far, we've been talking about worldviews. In general, there are 7 possible logical worldviews, according to Norm Geisler in his introduction to worldviews. Not everybody agrees with that. At this point, now that we've looked at everything in Norm Geisler's approach, I should tell you that not all students of worldviews and philosophy and apologetics and whatnot agree on how to organize things. There are a number of books out there that would count Islam as a whole separate worldview. I don't really see it that way, although Islam is definitely a non-Christian religion. Islam is theistic. They believe that there is one God who is the creator, and that puts them into the generic theistic worldview package. Nevertheless, people who are Muslim deserve a unique apologetic approach. Because they're non-Christians, they need to hear that authentic Christianity is a more satisfying approach to life than Islam. And that can be done, and it ought to be done. And it doesn't quite fit into Norm Geisler's approach to worldviews. Today we're going to talk briefly about what happens when a worldview is changed. What happens when people go through what we call conversion? Because that's really what's happening when someone is converted to Christianity, when they have lived for a bit and then decide that they're going to become Christians. There's a whole lot of stuff going on. Behind the screen that we can see, the Spirit of God has been at work for often quite a long time, and has brought them to the point. Sometimes we get the privilege of being involved. Sometimes we don't. It's interesting to watch the process happen. Now, conversion itself is a specific moment where an individual passes from death to life by the power of God's Spirit. That's the new birth. And the visible response to that, where people exercise faith and they repent for sin and all of the things that usually go with faith and repentance, all of that is visual, and we call that conversion. But all of that stuff that we discussed in Romans is packed into a fairly short time where the switch is thrown and everything happens at once. But prior to that moment, quite a bit is done. And at that moment, quite a bit more, or after the moment, quite a bit more needs to be done. And so you've got a building process that has the conversion event right in the middle. So some general points here to understand about worldviews in general. People typically don't shop around for a worldview. So I've titled this slide "Choosing a Worldview," and really we don't do that. It's frankly that it's kind of a silly title, but that's what I've got. People don't shop around. They don't go to a mall where there are various worldviews on display. Most people grow up in a system that includes a religious or anti-religious worldview. They rarely, if ever, confront the worldview itself because the worldview becomes a part of the background. It's a part of the furniture. I was in Turkey. Oh my goodness, many years ago with a group of pastors, and we'd had quite an adventure. We were in Istanbul in Turkey. I was talking to a lady behind the counter at something. Must have been a baklava shop, or it was something, some tourist place, and she spoke some English. So I asked her if she was Muslim, and she looked at me kind of funny, and she says, "Well, of course I'm Muslim. I'm Turkish." And that's the way it usually goes. That's the way life often happens. This woman didn't choose to be Muslim. She was born in a Muslim country. There were no options ever presented to her. So of course she's Muslim. Why would she not be Muslim? People rarely confront the worldview itself unless something goes wrong. And that's a point that I'm going to pick on for a while because all worldviews to a greater or lesser extent are inconsistent, including Christianity, because none of us can be perfect. And none of us have a perfect understanding of how God really works and what the Bible really means. So our worldviews typically have weak spots and thin places. There are things that don't work. But we normally don't notice that unless something fairly serious goes wrong, some major inconsistency, some collision with reality forces us to see that the worldview that we've lived with is just wrong. And then we need to be looking for something else. Now, as Christians, we possess a worldview and a whole lot more that answers the most pressing needs of the human race in a very satisfying way. We have the answers. And a big part of the task of evangelism is to help people around us recognize the problems associated with a less than true worldview. Most worldviews have some elements of truth. Otherwise, they just couldn't exist. They just wouldn't work at all. They don't work very well typically, but they work enough that most people don't worry about it. But when there are problems, sometimes we can help the non-Christian recognize that the problem he's experiencing is actually a problem with his worldview. He's got an inadequate view of the world. It doesn't take into account everything that's going on. When people recognize the problems with their own system, they may be willing to look at alternatives. And we call this event conversion. And it's important to understand, I'll emphasize this over and over as we get into apologetics, because it's important to realize I don't argue anybody into the kingdom of God. I don't convince anybody with my brilliant array of evidence and whatnot. Conversion results from the work of God's Spirit in the heart of an unsaved person. That person is unsaved. He's not almost saved or mostly saved. He's spiritually dead and heading for hell. And God's Spirit reaches down and does a miraculous work of regeneration, which translates him from death to life. That conversion event, that regeneration event, to be technical, is entirely the work of God. And we can't force that, but we can be a part of the process. When the Spirit of God is at work in the life of an individual, one of the symptoms that we see is the readiness of non-Christians to begin asking questions. And sometimes they come up trying to get into an argument with you. I welcome that. That's fine. You want to argue? Sure, I'll argue. We can have some fun with that. I've honestly never won an argument in the sense of leading somebody to Christ as the result of an argument. The one who wants to start an argument with me is being pushed on by the Spirit of God. And he feels the need to bump up against a Christian and maybe cause him some damage to his worldview, or see what happens when he asks what he thinks is a horribly difficult question. What happens next is really important. The Bible in 1 Peter 3:15 says we must always be ready to give an answer, or to make a defense, literally, for the hope that is in us. Well, why should we do that? Because when non-Christians are asking questions, especially when they're asking combative, hostile questions, giving a good answer will not merely shut them up, which sometimes is all you can expect, but will get them to start thinking. And if the Spirit of God is really working in them, they will start thinking. And that thought process will bump them a little further on toward the moment when conversion actually happens. This is all part of God's Spirit working in the background. Okay, I've given us a pair of rose-colored glasses. A worldview is a whole lot like a pair of glasses. I've worn glasses all my life. Well, since second grade, but all my life, basically. I can't imagine getting around without them. I remember once in the Philippines, we were in an old church. I think we were in Malolos. We were looking around in the old church, and one of my lenses fell out. Literally just fell out and rolled across the floor, and I couldn't do anything. There was a famous Filipino movie star who was visiting, and Oscar and Sally wanted me to go out and meet this movie star, and I couldn't even do that because my glasses didn't work. My glasses are really, really important to me. So worldviews can develop problems just like a pair of glasses can develop problems. If your worldview is just wrong, like atheism, if you're looking at a God-filled world with a pair of glasses that filters out everything that has to do with God, you've got a distorted view. So a distorted vision through glasses that are the wrong color or the wrong shape and size. There's all kinds of things that can go wrong with a pair of glasses. A worldview that is distorted is a problem. Now, if you have your glasses on all the time, you maybe don't notice it, but most people step outside this inconsistent worldview once in a while, just because life happens. For example, a philosopher who is an atheist may believe that effects don't need causes and that everything is utterly random. Okay, that's a philosophical position that's actually taken. And it doesn't matter what we call that, but there's philosophers who hold that. But you'll notice if you follow this philosopher around when he isn't in his classroom waxing eloquent, he will get in his car to drive home for the day. And if you follow him in your own car, you'll notice that he actually stops at red lights and doesn't go again until the light turns green. Well, why is that? If everything is random and there's no cause and effect relationships, then you ought to simply drive randomly. Drive through red lights, stop for green lights. You should do whatever feels okay to you in the moment. Why don't you, if you're an atheist and you believe that there is no order in the universe? Well, because he knows better. He knows that he'll get rear-ended or T-boned or he'll have a terrible accident. He can't live consistently with his philosophy. And he stops for red lights as though that actually made sense, because of course it does make sense. He doesn't believe in common sense, but he uses it all the same. Often enough, we'll encounter non-Christian people who are having difficulty making sense of the world that they've been taught fits a particular worldview pattern. And the world doesn't seem to make sense to them anymore because their worldview is distorting the reality. You and I have the answer to their questions. And if we could ever get them to start asking questions, we do have answers to those questions. Sometimes the glasses break. So that would produce a crack in the glass. So that a little bit of the world that shows through, not as rose-colored, but as it actually is. A little bit of the undistorted world is briefly visible. And logically, this is an inconsistency in the worldview. All worldviews, except a perfectly formed biblical worldview, which none of us have yet, are to some extent inconsistent. Intelligent people notice those things and ask questions. Back in the day, 200 years ago, deism, and there's some other system, but deism is interesting because it died out as a major system. Deism believes that God created the world out of nothing. They actually believe that there is an eternal, omnipotent creator who created the entire universe out of nothing at all. They also believe that supernatural events like miracles can't happen. Okay, all of a sudden, that's a big problem. Creation is obviously the greatest miracle ever performed. If God created everything there is out of nothing at all, which is what the Bible teaches, that's the biggest miracle that ever happened. And if you believe that, why do you have trouble with crossing the Red Sea or turning snakes into sticks? Why are the little miracles difficult, but the great miracle you accept? And that inconsistency is ultimately what caused the destruction of deism as a separate operational system. Modern deists are still inconsistent. they often don't realize it, but they are. So we go on to the third thing that can happen with a worldview, this is what I call shattered glasses. I've never had my glasses completely scrunched, but I've bent my wires a couple of times. I took a fall in the barn a couple of years ago, trying to feed the horses here at the house. Horses and goats are down there, and I took a fall over the rail and ended up down on the floor of the barn in the mud and the hay and the horse poo, and I landed glasses first. I landed on my face, so I had this terrible bruise, but I also scrunched up my glasses. And for a couple of days, there wasn't very much I could do or see because my glasses were all pointing in the wrong direction. They were really, really bad. I didn't break them, but it took an optometrist to get my eyeballs realigned. So perhaps there's an atheist out there who believes there is no God. Okay, that's what he believes, and that he may choose his ethical and moral values to suit himself. Eventually, that approach to life will fail, sometimes catastrophically, because atheism is not a viable life system. It doesn't work. Stuff goes wrong. So most people end up trying to live some kind of an inconsistent atheism. And it's not satisfying. It doesn't work well. And ultimately, when we come to the end of history and we get to the judgment day, it doesn't work at all. You end up in hell. So atheism is ultimately not a livable system. Many people we meet have shattered their lives by making a series of really bad choices. Their lives are a mess. And frankly, we can help. If they want help, we can help. If the Spirit of God is working with them, they'll want help. And that's where we come in. And at that point, our apologetics begins to matter. Okay, let's think about worldviews just a little bit. If you're in the market for a worldview, I know you're not, but this is how we evaluate a worldview. There's some things to avoid, some things to look for, and logically, this is how we evaluate a worldview. And it's just a sort of introduction to this, how to evaluate. A worldview affects everything. So those going through a catastrophic worldview event may need some guidance on what to look for. So if you've got a friend whose life is falling apart, they're beginning to consider the religious or philosophical or whatever options, maybe they'd appreciate some guidance. We'll start looking at some mistakes that people make, and these are actually mistakes that you can really make. First of all, you can't read everything. It's literally impossible to read all the literature about all the possible worldviews, all the possible philosophic systems, all of the religions, you can't do it. It's not even reasonable for one person to read everything about his own worldview. You just can't do it. Instead, you should read enough to understand the basics, and then it's time to make a decision. So quit studying after a while and look for the real thing. Secondly, beauty is only skin deep. Most worldviews look good in their public presentation. So I've been to Buddhist temples in a couple of places. South Korea was one. So now, interestingly, South Korea is one of the most thoroughly Christian countries on the planet. They are really a net exporter of Christianity. I like Korea a lot, but there's still a Buddhist community there, and they're free to worship. And I've been to Buddhist temples, and they're they're very pretty on the outside, and I like the peacefulness, and there's a lot to like about Buddhism. But that beauty is only skin deep. When you get a little farther down, it's pretty bad. Uh, in other parts of the world, there's something moving about a Buddhist monastery in Tibet, for example, or the grandeur of a Greek temple to Apollo in Greece. There are still these big temples to Apollo, one of many of the gods, and they're very nice. Yeah, they're very impressive, and there's something moving about these massive, beautiful old temples. Carl Sagan and other atheists for many years have made a good case in living color for their heresy. And they do a nice job of it. I mean, the Carl Sagan series, Cosmos, was beautiful, magnificently produced with all the trimmings. They spent a lot of money making that look really, really good. Many worldviews are very appealing, but they're not healthy over the long haul. Okay, thirdly, what works is not necessarily true. Pragmatism is what this is called. There are lots of worldviews that work reasonably well over the short term, especially if everybody in the society has the same viewpoint. Pantheism, for example, Eastern religion, can produce a reasonably stable, if often kind of backward society. Here in America and other parts of the world, Mormonism, which is really wrong. It's polytheism. It's a very unhealthy religion, but it tends to produce strong families with good work ethic and tightly linked communities. And there's nothing wrong with any of those things. We've had friends who are Mormons, and they're very nice people, but their worldview is going to take them to hell. They are really wrong. If a worldview is true, it will work if properly understood and applied. So Christianity doesn't always work because some of us just don't know what we're doing. But when Christianity is applied, when biblical lifestyles are lived, it works very well. Stable societies with growth in all of the cultural areas generally happen in a Christian society. But simply because a thing works doesn't make it right. Lying to the boss to get a day off might work, but you won't be able to do that for very long if you keep it up. Okay, fourthly, the majority can be wrong. It's a biblical principle that the majority is almost always wrong. And most people at the time of Christopher Columbus thought he was wrong. They didn't think he would be able to get to India by sailing west. Turns out they were right. He didn't get to India. He got to America. But the world could be circumnavigated either direction. Most people didn't think that. And they were just wrong. The truth isn't up to a majority vote. Peer pressure, especially if it covers a whole culture, can be really powerful. But if you're going to be honest about a worldview, it has to be resisted. At the same time, we need to try to avoid the reverse error, which would argue that the fewer people who believe in this thing, the truer it's likely to be. This leads to people being one-off crazies who live out in the woods someplace with a belief in the Cookie Monster or whatever. You need to avoid that too. The majority can be wrong, but one idiot off in the corner can also be wrong. Think about other ones. Sometimes people hold to outlandish opinions that have been rejected by everyone else, and frankly, there may be a reason for that. A view held only by a select few enlightened ones may just be a lie. The truth is simply an honest evaluation of what really is. Here in America, for a while after the Civil War and continuing up to, well, actually fairly recently, we remember some around our age, there was a group called the Aryan Nations, white supremacists, and they taught that Israel was actually just white people, and anybody who was any other color was some other kind of human being and not part of the human race. And most everybody recognized that these guys were crazy. In relatively modern years, they've sometimes dressed up like Nazis and lived in camps. We had one here in North Idaho for a while. It was the headquarters for the whole world for this Aryan Nations idiocy. And there were sometimes as many as a dozen of them. Well, they were just wrong, and they were just stupid. They're really bad. A view held by just a few might just be wrong. The truth is an honest evaluation of what really is. If you tell it like it actually is, you'll be telling the truth, whatever the truth is, whether it's held by many or few. In another element of this, the majority can be wrong, but difficulty should not prompt a rejection of a worldview. A worldview is a big deal. Most things in life that are significant require some effort. The fact that you can't quite understand all of the details of a worldview in the first go is not really significant. Ask anybody who's trained for the Olympics or served in the special forces if it was hard to accomplish that. Well, of course it was. Christianity is not without its mysteries. There are elements of the truth that we won't know until heaven. But we can know the basics, and we should be able to state them so that they make sense to us and to others. Okay. Fifthly, the unexplained is not necessarily unexplainable. Every worldview has some difficult elements, some more than others, and some corners of the Christian worldview are hard to explain. The question about why God allows evil in the world is, in fact, it's a difficult question. It has good answers. It's not unexplainable, but non-Christians don't often agree with our answers. That's okay. We have some corners of the worldview that are difficult. Live with it. The best worldview should be able to show how everything can be explained. Maybe we can't give a good answer today, but everything should be explainable. And an infinite, eternal God does in fact explain everything. Okay, well then the last issue, absurdity, doesn't guarantee truth. An early church father said, concerning the doctrine of the Trinity, I believe because it is absurd. And what he meant by that is not quite what modern people think he meant by that. What Tertullian meant was that theologians would not have invented a concept like the Trinity lest they be driven by the evidence or the text of Scripture. What I mean is that if you were just inventing a religion out of whole cloth, and there was no reality behind your religion at all, you would certainly not invent the doctrine of the Trinity. That would just be stupid. Nevertheless, that is what the Bible teaches. And so we teach it. And Tertullian said, well, I believe it because it's absurd. Some have taken that to mean that belief in crazy ideas simply because they are crazy. And that's not what Tertullian meant. Irrational ideas are never true. And the Trinitarian doctrine is difficult. It would be absurd to go there if it wasn't true. But once you accept that this is true, and I don't quite understand it yet, then you can see how it can be understood. Okay, let's go a little better. How to test for the truth. This is kind of important because this goes down to questions of logic, and we don't use logic to bludgeon people into coming to Christ. That's not how this works. But sometimes you can help guide people. Okay, how to test for whether or not something is true. Okay, first of all, truth has only to do with propositions. A proposition is a statement. We call it a categorical statement that asserts that something is true or that a thing is something else. It is actually trying to say something that can be either proven or disproven. So if you say, for example, well, gosh, I could feel like ice cream this afternoon. How about you? You're not really stating a proposition there. It's not a proposition. You're not saying anything one way or the other. You'd like some ice cream? Maybe not. Who cares? But if we've got time, we'll go get some. All right, that's nice. But if I say something like, God is immutable, he never changes, I've made a proposition. I cannot, in the same worldview, state that God is mutable, he changes. Those two propositions contradict each other. And for that reason, at least one is wrong. Okay, so the law of non-contradiction is very basic. And I mean, it's extraordinarily basic. It's so basic that most philosophers have argued that we don't need to prove that. The basicness of the law of non-contradiction is just very important. In the central premises of a worldview, there really shouldn't be any contradictions. And most worldviews can be more or less consistent on a lot of things. But you have to look at the core basics of the worldview and ask yourself, are they saying, is some of this contradictory? Okay. Secondly, a worldview needs to be comprehensive. It has to use all the data, all the pieces of the puzzle. If it ignores elements of reality in order to hold a position, it's a failure as a worldview. To be honest, while a Christian may not appreciate an atheistic worldview, at least the atheist is trying to explain everything. He doesn't do a very good job of it. Most atheists have absolutely no idea how to explain the existence of the church. Again, most worldviews try to explain everything. They are rarely successful, but they try. Thirdly, a worldview has to be livable. No, not only has to be true, but it has to produce a system that you can live with. The truth will produce a system that's livable. The problem with this pragmatic approach is that untrue systems can be lived with. The Hindu pantheist, seeking the cessation of all desire, who starves himself slowly to death on a mountain crag, has found his livable system. An atheist who believes that life has no meaning and only suicide is consistent will have found a livable path by killing himself. And both of those approaches have been done. And is the worldview, is it really livable? Well, sometimes. Fourthly, a worldview must be consistently affirmable. Now, this is a little bit of philosophy. Sometimes a statement can be made. For instance, I could claim to be a unicorn. My granddaughter, once in a while, claims that she is a reindeer. Sometimes she's a mermaid. We'll see what she is today when she arrives. A statement can be made without it being consistently affirmable. To be consistently affirmable, a statement can't contradict itself. For example, atheists will sometimes say, nothing can be said about reality, but they're making something that sounds like a clear proposition, but it implies that something can be known, namely nothing. It contradicts his own assertion. If nothing can be known, nothing can be said about reality, you're making a statement that something, namely nothing at all, can be known about reality. So it's contradicted right by itself. The pantheist will say, reality is not rational. Okay, because of the yin and the yang and the denial of the law of non-contradiction. But that appears to be a rational statement about reality. If it's true, it's false. It defeats itself. Most non-Christian worldviews are full of self-defeating assertions. It would take a lifetime to find them all, and only a few in the key areas of thought will show a rational person the logical inconsistency. So let's summarize where we are here. I think this is the last slide in this sequence. Most non-Christian worldviews are full of self-defeating assertions, and we can't find them. In the end, it's helpful for the Christian to remember that there's a whole world of contrary ideas out there. We can't deal with all of them, but we can be ready with good answers for the people with those worldviews who cross our paths. Apologetics is the art and science of making a defense of authentic Christianity. And that's what we're going to be looking at for the next several weeks. I'm going to end this. Let's see if I can do this. I'm going to stop this one and start another share. Hi there, everybody. I'm still at it. You haven't lost me yet. Let's see. No, that's not the one I wanted. Okay, that one is working. And I've got to kill this one. Ah, okay. Here we go. The difficulties of making everything work. Okay, here we are. The title of the series that we're going to do on apologetics is Know Why You Believe. And this is actually the title of a little book by a man named Paul Little. He wrote this back in the 60s. So this is an old book. It was rewritten several times. But this is a series of questions that unbelievers ask and answers from apologetics. And I found it a very, very helpful way of approaching the whole topic. If we look at questions that unbelievers typically ask, maybe we can find some answers. The rest of the lecture that I'm going to be doing is taken from another book by Kenneth Boa and Robert Bowman called Faith Has Its Reasons. And that's what we'll be looking at mostly for the next few weeks as we take a look at the styles of apologetics. Now, real professional apologetics guys will tell you that their approach is the only correct one. But the fact is, everybody who does apologetics does it a different way. I've given you the definition a little earlier. We're going to come to this for just a few minutes. So apologetics is a big name for an important ministry. And all believers are called to do at least some apologetics. Some believers are called to do this professionally, and to go out into the world and answer big questions in difficult places. The New Testament tells us to be ready to give an answer. And the word answer or defense is the New Testament word apologeo or apologia. And so we get our English word apologetics from a Greek word. And our little dog Maggie is letting us all know that granddaughter Deborah has just arrived with my daughter. So that's what's going on downstairs. So apologetics is the art and science of presenting a reasonable defense for the truth claims of authentic Christianity. It's a big name. And I want to look at the elements of that definition. So it's an art and a science. It's an art in the sense that there's no one approach to every apologetics question. There are often a dozen different ways of approaching it, and some of them work better than others. Sometimes you could argue that any of half a dozen different approaches will work just as well. It's like when I was flying back in the day, coming into an airport, there were several ways you could approach that airport. You didn't always have to come from the east or always from the north. You could come from any direction, and that would dictate how you lined up for the specific runway that you were going to be using. But you could come from any of a number of directions. There's no one approach to every apologetics question. There's an art to recognizing opportunities and finding ways to open conversations. So if we're having a conversation with a non-Christian, frankly, there are some people who really are good at this. I've enjoyed Sam Spatola doing evangelism, just listening to his work, how he handles people. It's fun because he does it differently every way. He's building relationships, finding common ground, looking for things to talk about, and it's just fun. There's an art to this, and everybody's approach to art is a little bit different. And the point I'm making here is that that's perfectly normal and that's really good. Anybody who tells you that there's only one way to do evangelism or to teach is just wrong. They've never done either, probably. Apologetics is also a science. So science in the sense of careful logic and patient search for just the right material, the right evidence. Science in the sense of really understanding the questions being asked. That's not an art, although it involves some art. It's the science of being careful, of sifting the evidence, of understanding the logic behind the questions and behind the answers. Okay, it's the art and science of presenting a reasonable answer to the questions that non-Christians have. So apologetics is built on human reason. As we get farther into the approaches to apologetics, you're going to find some who will argue that there's no good thing in human reason and all philosophy has to be abandoned completely. Hardly anybody actually stays consistent with that position. Nevertheless, apologetics is built on human reason. Human reason is God-given. It's a part of the universals of the world, of the universe itself. But human reason is affected by the fall. None of us are perfect. And our logic is always something short of perfect. We use the laws of reason as well as we are able to build a case. When we're trying to answer a question, we try to be as reasonable as we can, looking at the evidence of scripture, the evidence of history, the evidence of science, whatever we're looking at, or the evidence of logic. Some people go one way, some people go another. But apologetics always has to be reasonable. If you're just getting angry, it's time to quit for the day. Go, go have a cappuccino and come back at it another day. If you're being unreasonable, if you're just asserting things that nobody wants to believe, okay, now I'm, oh, what happened? Don't you just love it when the technology is so helpful? Okay, I'm going to go back to where I was, share that again. Okay, we're still here. Some of my stuff is not working. Oscar, wave at me if you can hear me. All right, thank you. Okay, so we do use human reason. Authentic Christianity. We're not trying to defend every kind of practice that some Christians do. There's a group of people in the American South who believe in handling poisonous snakes in order to demonstrate that they've got faith. And about half the time people die. It's not smart to believe something like that. And as an apologist, I wouldn't defend a thing like that. Also, we ought not be defending things outside of the core beliefs that are common to most of Christianity. For example, in apologetics, we don't usually defend the practice of water baptism. Now, I believe that that's the correct way to do baptism, because that's what the word means. But that's not part of apologetics. Some beliefs and practices of some Christians are just indefensible. Some beliefs belong to particular groups within Christianity. Baptists practice water baptism. The Friends Church down the street from us doesn't practice baptism. Okay, I respect that. I like those people. I disagree, but we get along. C.S. Lewis, in his book, Mere Christianity, speaks of what virtually all Christians have in common. He actually wrote that book for his friend J.R.R. Tolkien at Oxford. C.S. Lewis was an evangelical Anglican, and J.R.R. Tolkien, author of The Lord of the Rings, was a Roman Catholic. Tolkien was wondering, what can I possibly have in common with C.S. Lewis? Even though they were already friends, they wondered. So Lewis wrote this little short book called Mere Christianity, which defines the things that we actually have in common. And it's not huge.
But it's if you look at the doctrines that Roman Catholics and Baptists and Presbyterians and uh, Dutch Reformed all have in common, there's a sizable batch of them. Those are the things that we're actually trying to defend. Authentic Christianity, the real thing. We don't have to defend against things that non-Christians all know is authentic Christianity. We don't have to defend the Crusades. I do tend to defend the Crusades, but that's not a part of apologetics. Narrow field. Okay, we can divide the approaches of apologetics into two general categories: evangelism and teaching. The evangelist is aiming to answer legitimate questions coming from non-Christians. So perhaps he's got an audience, which is really fun. To get an audience of non-Christians who are willing to ask questions, wow, what fun. I would go to a thing like that anytime. And I've only been to a few of those, and you'd be surprised at how crazy the questions are. Because typically, the folks who would come to a meeting like that don't know anything at all. And so they ask literally stupid questions. And the apologist is trying to give good answers that will lead non-Christians in the right direction. When you've got a group like that, you're not aiming at everybody. Out of 40 people, there may be one or two who will ever respond. Those are the ones you're after. The other kind of apologetics is teaching. This is strengthening and building up believers. So with an audience of believers, the apologist's task is to answer questions that they might have. How can we possibly know that God created the universe in 6 days flat? Resurrections are impossible. How could Jesus have gotten about? How could that happen? Crossing the Red Sea violates the laws of gravity. How could? And those are good questions. It's worth answering the questions. Sometimes we need to answer questions that they're not asking yet. Build a foundation that will help them later on when they've matured to the point that they are asking those questions. For me, the teaching part of apologetics has always been the larger portion. I've almost always worked with classrooms full of college students, and for them, what I'm building is a foundation. They need to know that the Bible is the Word of God. It is inerrant. And here's the reasons that I believe that that's true. Here's the evidence that I'm building that on, and the logic that I'm building that on. Evidence and logic always work together. We always put them together. So what can we say about these two general approaches? First of all, the evangelist is always going to be aiming to answer legitimate questions, or maybe silence a non-Christian critic who's using a bad argument. And those are such fun. These non-Christians who think they've got gotcha questions that will certainly shut up a Christian. It doesn't usually work. Apologetics for evangelism is always aimed at convincing the non-Christian that Christianity is reasonable, that it's acceptable. But I think this is really important. You're going to understand why I think this is so important as we get farther into this. But a point I've made a couple of times, I'm going to make it again. We don't argue a person into heaven. I don't beat him up with my logic and my evidence and expect that he'll receive Christ. It doesn't work that way. God always does the work of salvation. When a non-Christian is asking honest questions, that's the best time of all. That's often the first movings of the Spirit of God in his life. If he's asking honest questions, even if he's combative, even if he's really angry, that's a wonderful sign. He deserves a good answer. Give him a good answer. When a mocker, an atheist who thinks he's smarter than everybody, is attacking Christianity, the Christian has the opportunity to answer him. Not for his sake. He's lost. He's not looking for a way. That's why he's doing what he's doing. But for the sake of those who may be listening. When I was quite a bit younger, I used to do that on the streets of Portland. Find a group, sometimes a Hare Krishna groups or something like that, and start up an argument with one of the practitioners, just for the fun of it and for the opportunity to say things that the crowd that would always gather around would hear. Who knows? You never know. The teacher, on the other hand, is going to be providing Christians with evidence and logical arguments for their faith. The work of the teacher is to strengthen and to build the church by a systematic survey of scripture and doctrine and evidences for the faith. A good teacher always looks for the opportunities to provide a bit of evidence, some backstory, some context. Christianity is eminently believable, will never be embarrassed by presenting the truth. There are, and all I'm going to give you today is the list. There are 4 general approaches to apologetics. Classical apologetics, which puts its foundation on reason and philosophy. Evidentialism looks at the facts alone. Let's lay out the facts and present an inductive case for Christianity. Reformed apologetics claims to put an emphasis on the Bible alone. Reformed apologetics I find really fascinating. I tend to be a Reformed apologist. I'll tell you what that means as we get into it. Then fideism. Fideism comes from the word faith in Latin. And the fideists will say the logic, the reason, the evidence don't matter, only believe. Somebody tells you something, just believe it. Well, that's not quite right. Fideism is a fascinating approach. Most apologists put a thumbs down to fideism. It's used as a pejorative. I'm going to introduce you to some of the reasons that fideism is usable. I don't believe it's the best approach, but it is usable. The reality is that most apologists, whether they're doing evangelism or teaching, will come from all 4 points of view, or at least 3 of the 4. And I'll show you how that works and how it's worked historically, and what the systems look like, some of the big names along the way. But that's where we're going to end up for today. Let me see if I can make this unshare. There we go. Unshare. And and naturally, there we go. Now I can ask everybody to unmute. All right, so that's a transition. Next week, we'll start off with classical apologetics, because frankly, it's the easiest to explain and the most obvious historical approach. But then we're going to go on into some of the modern approaches to apologetics. You'll see how the various approaches try to answer questions and try to defend Christianity against non-Christian attack. So that at the end of the day, people who are asking honest questions can get their answers. Believers who have doubts can have their faith strengthened. That's the point of the whole ministry. answer questions, deal with doubts, love people, be a friend to anybody that's willing to come by and hang out with you. The best use of espresso in Italy is as an excuse to get together with somebody that you don't know very well. Hey, let's have coffee. Can we talk? Let's go have coffee. And see where it goes. And in the midst of that, you'll have opportunities to do apologetics, even if you don't want. Okay, love y'all. We'll see you again next week. I'm going to dig through this pile. Oh yeah, some of us are still here. Okay, bye-bye, everybody. Sorry that the technology is so crazy. We'll see you next Wednesday and continue this. I wish I could be right there with you, but frankly, I can get more of you together in one place here than I can if I were to come to Italy. But we'll see you again. Love you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Oscar, I see you there.
Good night, everyone.
Tell Sally thank you for.
Buonanotte.
We're showing those around. Hello, my man. Look at everybody stretching. I know. I know. It's a hard thing to sit through a long lecture, but we can do it. Bye bye now. We'll see you next time.
Ciao. Done.
Ciao, ciao.